Hi, I'm Dagmar Ehling. Thank you for Holistic's Health to host this event. I'm going to be speaking to you about holistic solutions for allergic rhinitis, sinusitis, and postnasal drip. And I want to thank everyone for joining us, and we're going to delve into the subject matter right now. A little bit about my person. I've been practicing acupuncture, Chinese herbal, and functional medicine and nutrition and homeopathy since 1989. I'm the author of the Chinese Herbalist Handbook, which is a practitioner's book reference guide that was published in 1994. I taught herbal medicine to German physicians for over 10 years and online courses to acupuncturists for healthy seminars in Vancouver, Canada. I was also a faculty member of 2 Chinese medicine colleges in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the Southwest Acupuncture College, and then the International Institute of Chinese Medicine. And then I served on the National Commission, Certification Commission for Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine, on the committee which institutes the Chinese Herbal National Exam, and I did that for 7 years. And then I also served on the American Board of Oriental Reproductive Medicine, and I was the committee chair that administers the national exam. So I had people design questions, and then I had the final say of which questions went into the exam. And since 2004, I've been the co-owner of Oriental Health Solutions in Durham, North Carolina. So today I'm going to speak to you about this respiratory subject matter, but before we delve into that, I want to just give you a little disclaimer that the Chinese and functional medicine treatments that are offered here in this seminar are really just for general suggestions and educational purposes only. Please use the herbs and homeopathics mentioned in this video at your own risk. If in doubt, please check with your physician, Chinese medicine practitioner, or homeopath before implementing any new strategies, especially if you're pregnant or take prescription medications. So now we're going to delve into some fundamental Chinese medicine definitions. So when we talk about respiratory illnesses, particularly common colds, flus, allergies, sinusitis, postnasal drip, those types of things, we talk about some kind of airborne pathogen. And in Chinese medicine, we don't call it airborne pathogen, we call it a wind pathogen. So wind can either be combined with wind cold, so wind combines with cold, and in that case, the patient will have chills that are greater than the fever. So they'll feel cold, they have an aversion to cold, they'll have aversion to wind, they can't sit in front of the air conditioner, they will hate the wind blowing on them, or the wind can combine with heat, in which case there is fever, which is greater than the chills, so these people will have more fever than chills. They could have a slightly elevated temperature or a real high fever. And then the treatment strategy in Chinese medicine is to induce sweating or diaphoresis. So the idea is that when we have an external pathogen invading the body, the wind then restricts proper energy flow or qi flow in the body, causing all these variety of symptoms that people will get when they have a common cold. And then the pores are typically closed, so the wind entered the body through the pores, and then we want to let the wind back out through the pores. So that means we have to open the pores. And so when we do that, we'll sweat. So whatever we can do to induce sweating, and there'll be a number of plants and herbs we can use to help that, to facilitate that process. So wind invasion can then, if it's not properly treated at the right time, so meaning it lodges longer in the body, it can then combine with phlegm damp or phlegm heat. So as the wind restricts proper energy flow, it will also restrict the fluid flow in the body. So in that case, we can get lung phlegm damp, which is cold phlegm, or we'll get lung phlegm heat, which is hot phlegm. And these have very distinct symptoms. So like in a lung phlegm damp, we'll have phlegm that is either clear or white, and it can be thick or thin. And in a lung phlegm heat pattern, we will have yellow, green, or even blood-tinged phlegm. that can also be thin or thick. So the thin or thickness means that there's either more phlegm or less phlegm. And just a little bit background information of how we look at fluids in Chinese medicine. It's a very interesting pattern, how we look at it. So when we think about water, we know that the body is 70% water. And we know that the more liquid the water is, the more we have cellular movement. So we have nutrients be delivered into the cells and waste materials moved out of the cells. So it's really important to have good fluid water. But if there is some kind of pathogen, in this case, a wind pathogen, the water can become turbid. So it's not as easy to have cellular movement happening. And then dampness and phlegm can evolve and develop. And so then we have a dampness in this situation where we have like a runny nose, or we have nasal congestion, or we have sneezing with a runny nose. And then that dampness gets thicker and turns into phlegm, which then gets either, like we talked about, is a phlegm damp, phlegm heat pattern. And then in a more severe case, we get phlegm nodulation, which means then the patient might get nasal polyps. That's like a cystic formation, or it can even turn into stone, like in tonsil stones, for example. So that's the continuum of water. And so here we want to make sure that we can, treat at the proper level wherever the patient is. So if the patient is in the damp phase, then we want to use herbs and acupuncture points that resolve the dampness. If they're in the tonsil stone phase, which is of course a lot harder to treat, the more dense the phlegm gets, the more calcification, it's really hard to break that up. So some of these patients will need surgery. So it just depends on where we are and how soft the stones are. There's still some herbs we can use for that, but it's much harder. So the treatment strategy in this phase is to, again, we want to induce the sweating, because the person most likely will still have residual wind in their system. And then we want to resolve the phlegm cold or phlegm heat, depending on where they are. And so the most common thing I recommend to patients is ginger tea. So this is used to be in the wind cold situation. And then basically you buy 3 to 4 slices of, you cut up a ginger root and you cut up the slices. And then you can add in a diced scallion as well. Also, I often don't do that. It's not really necessary if you don't have it at hand. And then you bring it to a boil, you simmer the ginger tea for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then you wrap yourself in warm clothing or warm blanket, and you drink the tea while it's still warm. And the goal is to induce a mild whole body sweat to release the pathogen, to push out the wind. You can also take a hot bath while drinking the ginger tea, and you can also do a sauna. And then for those people, just as a side note, not really related to respiratory issues, but ginger is also a great herb for people who have chronic nausea for whatever reason. And of course, that sometimes should be further investigated if that's the major complaint. But for people who have nausea, or who have people who are not hungry in the morning, for example, who don't eat breakfast because they're nauseous, ginger tea would be a great way to start off for them during the day. So, and then the next herb is peppermint tea. Peppermint tea should be used in a wind heat situation. Here we have, you want to either grow it in your garden, or if you don't have it, just get 2 peppermint tea bags in an 8-ounce mug, and then let it steep until it's cool enough to drink. And peppermint tea will get rid of the wind heat situation via sweating. And as a side note, peppermint is also great for bringing superficial itchy rashes to the surface, like people who have hives, hives that move around. So rashes that move around are also called in Chinese medicine wind rashes. So peppermint is the herb for that situation. The next herb is chrysanthemum tea, Zhuhua. This is supposed to be used in a wind heat situation affecting the eyes primarily. So this is great for red, itchy eyes during allergy season. And then you can drink the tea and or you can dip a cosmetic pad into the tea and then just place it on your eyes as a warm compress. So this is great for people who have, red eyes or conjunctivitis or something like that. And it's really great to use for this situation. And you can purchase chrysanthemum tea in a Chinese food store by the pound. It's really cheap. In Thailand, they serve chrysanthemum tea instead of ice water. Like in America, when you go to a restaurant, you get ice water. In Thailand, you get chrysanthemum tea. And you use 1 tablespoon in an 8-ounce mug, steep for 10 minutes, and then use it as above. Then we have magnolia buds, xinyi which is a great herb, which you can also buy in a Chinese food store. This is used for wind cold, causing sinus or nasal congestion with a runny discharge. So it's runny and clear rather than thick and yellow. Okay, so then you have to distinguish here. So this is only to be used if it's runny and clear. Use 1 tablespoon in an 8-ounce mug, steep for 10 minutes or so, and then drink the tea and or use it as an inhalation to open up the nose and the sinuses. And the way you do that is you put the tea, as it's still steaming, and then you put a towel over your head and then just inhale the steam. And that will really open up your sinuses. Let's see, and then we have this herbal pharmacy. This is a picture of our bulk herb pharmacy. We have both a granule pharmacy and a bulk herb pharmacy. So in the granules, some company puts every herb that is available in its raw form into a granule. So they cook it, they freeze dry it, and so there's a whole process. And all the patient needs to do is pour hot water on it. Whereas when you use the bulk herbs, they have to cook a tea at home. So that's a little bit more labor intensive. It's also a little stronger. So for people who have more severe conditions, the bulk herbs are better. Every herbal formula is custom tailored based on the patient's current complaint and their medical history. So at Oriental Health Solutions, we assess every patient's individual situation and tailor their treatment accordingly. Nutritional thoughts. So now we're moving into the whole nutrition. Obviously, there's so much to it, but I just wanted to highlight some things that are really crucial that I've seen just, people thinking they're eating great and maybe actually they're not. So because really diet needs to be custom tailored to address the person's terrain. So when we talk about the terrain, we really mean the person's inherent physiology. Some people are cold natured, some people are hot natured, some people are neutral natured. So their diet needs to be somewhat different. Like a person who's chronically cold natured and doesn't have a respiratory condition, is just chronically cold natured, they should be consuming foods that are warm, like, Indian spices like coriander, cumin, turmeric and cardamom, those kinds of spices. Whereas if somebody is hot natured, they should avoid those foods. Because respiratory issues tend to be prone to lots of phlegm, we want to make sure that we avoid dairy products, because anything that's white and gooey will contribute to the dampness. And we know that gluten, if you look up research on gluten and how inflammatory it is, the word gluten comes from glue. So so gluten is a component in many grains and is added to many cookies and breads and things, and it has been hybridized to such an extent that the amount of gluten, in the ancient wheat was maybe 5%, and now it's more like 55%. So the amount of glue that's now in the wheat molecule has been really increased significantly. So that when you buy some cookie that is made with gluten and some other ingredients, and you throw it against the wall, it comes down in one piece. So it's really important that you don't eat that glue, because it will contribute to your phlegm situation in your sinuses and lungs. So, and not to mention that it's very inflammatory. So, and another thing that's really more unique to Chinese medicine is that we want to avoid foods from the fridge. We want to avoid foods that are raw and cold. And we also want to avoid creamy sauces. So, and the reason for that is, I often have patients, I do a very thorough food inventory when I see patients, and more often than not is, patient comes in, has whatever kind of phlegm issues, sinus congestion. And then when I get down to the diet, it's, oh yeah, I eat a lot of salads and I make a raw smoothie, with all these wonderful vegetables, and it's straight from the fridge and I put ice in it. And so the problem with that is that the digestive tract needs to be really warm, and the foods that we eat, because when it's cold in the center, meaning your stomach, small intestine area, when you eat a lot of cold foods, what happens is you slow down the secretion of gastric juices, and that makes the food less absorbable. You're absorbing fewer nutrients, and you're slowing down your entire metabolism. And as the food sits there, then you just get you get more accumulation of dampness. This is a Chinese medicine thing, a theory of Chinese medicine. And as you have dampness in your middle, you will have more likely dampness in your lungs and your head and your sinuses. So that's why you don't want to do that. And sometimes that's all I do is I warm somebody's diet up and their phlegm gets so much better. So this is huge. And unfortunately, like I said earlier, when we go to a restaurant, we get ice water. And it's like the worst thing we can do. We also want to identify food sensitivities. Individual people will have different food sensitivities, and we get to figure out what they are. I'm not a big fan of allergy testing as far as IgG, IgA testing, because it's not very reliable, and different testing companies have different methodologies. So you can run, if the patient uses like 4 different companies and does testing, they'll get 4 different results. So I don't really think that that's a great way to do it. I really am a fan of keeping a diary and doing, basically elimination provocation, and just keeping a diary and figuring out how the person feels. And it takes a little bit longer, it's more labor intensive, but I find that it really is more effective and cheaper. You also want to rule out enzyme deficiencies. So, some people just don't make certain enzymes, and that's the reason why they may have malabsorption syndrome. You want to look at short chain fatty acid deficiencies. Lots of people have, leaky gut issues. They might have, SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth issues. And so you want to look and see if that's going on. You want to manage the dysbiosis, gut permeability issues, and the diversity of the microbiome. So you want to look at all of that, because your respiratory system is only as healthy as your gut is, and as your overall inflammatory status is. You want to address blood sugar. It's a huge subject in clinic. I would say that probably about 85% of my patients have some kind of blood sugar problem. And obviously, junk food diets have no place in anyone's diet. So it's just, that's kind of a no-brainer. But we want to just get rid of those foods. Functional medicine approach. We want to look at certain labs sometimes. Sometimes I have patients, I ask them to bring in labs. And so we want to look and see what the blood sugar is doing, what adrenal health is doing, what immune markers, and many other markers that we look at that are useful to get a sense of the terrain of the person. Sometimes I do stool testing to rule out opportunistic bacteria, parasites, rule out H. pylori, candida, dysbiosis, and some of the other things I already mentioned. Particularly, we want to also look at the permeability issues. So we have different kinds of barriers. So we want the gut barrier and the skin barrier and the oral and the lung and the vaginal and nostril barrier. We want to have all those be intact. We do not want them to be leaky. So in order to have that happen, because the proteins that hold the enterocytes together are the same proteins that are in the blood-brain barrier, in the skin barrier, the oral barrier, the lung barrier, et cetera. They're all the same proteins. So if the person has a leaky gut issue or gut permeability issue, as it's referred to in research papers, they likely will have barrier issues in other areas in their body. So we want to identify issues with either oral tolerance, chemical tolerance, or autoimmune. So these are immunological patterns that we want to look at and see if there's an issue there. This is especially important in people who have been previously diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. And then we want to identify the immune barrier breakdown, like I mentioned above. So those are all the different barriers we want to look at. Lifestyle triggers, stress, relationship issues, we want to look at those. They play a really big role in people's lives. And luckily in Chinese medicine, we don't split physical from emotional from spiritual. It's all one thing. And we have ways of looking at it that we're all inclusive for the person in the way we treat them. We want to address mycotoxins in the body, particularly environmental or internal mycotoxins. It's a really big deal, especially in North Carolina, because it's a very humid environment and molds just grow really well here. And then we want to look at candida and whether or not the person has reflux. And, obviously that list is just a very small list, but there are all these things that we look at when we look at a patient who has respiratory diseases. Supplements, this is just a very small selection here. Vitamin D3, so the ideal way is to run the lab to see what the person's status is, what their blood work shows, and then dose it appropriately. I really don't like just making ballpark statements about how much a person should take. It's really depending on what their blood levels are. Vitamin C, you can be a little bit more generous with vitamin C. It's a great immune tonic. It helps with tissue healing and wound healing. It's a great immune tonic, and Linus Pauling did a lot of work on vitamin C, and he pushed people to bowel tolerance. I do not. I just because it is a cold vitamin, and so I just have a decent amount for people that need immune enhancement, and not go overboard. Vitamin A is also a great immune tonic. Ideally, it'd be great to measure it as well in blood, though many doctors are reluctant to do so, to measure it. Vitamin A is very abundant in beef liver. I'm a big fan of beef liver because it has bioavailable iron, copper, and vitamin A. Vitamin A is also very important for proper and good eye health. It prevents macular degeneration. Glutathione can either be, if you go to the functional medicine or integrative medicine doctor, you can get it as an IV, and that is really the best way of administration, but it is expensive. The next best thing is to use liposomal glutathione as a supplement. Liposomal simply just means it's highly absorbable, but less so than as in an IV. And then glutathione is the main amino acid that we need to turn on phase 2 detoxification in the liver. So it basically turns on the liver's detoxification pathway. Some people are inflamed because their livers aren't detoxifying them. So that's kind of like the plumbing is not working, and so they're getting really inflamed, not because of their diet, but because their livers aren't working. If glutathione is not available or too expensive, one could choose the precursors for glutathione, which are alpha-lipoic acid and N-acetylcysteine. So those can be used if, and you can read up on those and as far as when to use which and when. But they're both great for preventing respiratory symptoms of a variety of types, like sinusitis, post-nasal drip, frequent colds and flus, and things like that. Zinc is also a great immune tonic, and it's best used with food, because if you take too much zinc without food, there can be some nausea. So that's usually in people who take like 50 to 100 milligrams. So in smaller doses, that's not an issue, but it's best taken with food. Sufficient iron levels, like I said above, I'm a big fan of beef liver. have your liverwurst or your liver pate, it's really wonderful to get it there rather than taking an iron pill. When you take an iron pill or even an iron infusion, you're getting bio-unavailable iron, which can also be inflammatory. So it's best to get it from food. Turmeric and resveratrol are two wonderful herbs. Used together, they are dampening NF-kappa B. NF-kappa B is a protein in each cell that often is overactive in people with severe inflammatory disorders or autoimmune disease. And they're just great anti-inflammatories and in people who have any type of inflammation. So just a side note, for those people who take turmeric and are on blood thinners, that is not a good combination because turmeric is a blood thinner and will amplify the blood thinner. So don't do that. Don't use those two together. Holy basil and ashwagandha are great adaptogenic herbs. So we sort of briefly touched on adrenal health in the functional medicine portion. Adrenals need to be nurtured by, some people have hyperadrenia, some people have hypoadrenia. So we want to make sure that they're taking herbs to balance. So an adaptogen is an herb that helps to downregulate someone who is hyperadrenic and upregulate somebody who's hypoadrenic. So those are just a couple of herbs that one can use in those situations, like when you're like wired and tired kind of person, tired, wired, and stressed. And then a couple of homeopathic things. So a little longer explanation of how homeopathy works. I think Helen will be posting a link of how you can explain what homeopathy is and how it works. I don't really want to get into that right now because it's a rather lengthy explanation. But to boost the immune system and for hay fever prevention, you can use calcareum carbonicum 30C, one pellet once a day. And the way you take it is you just take the pellet and just let it dissolve under your mouth and about 5 to 10 minutes away from food and drink. So calcareum carbonicum is a great homeopathic. And homeopathic, so usually I'm just going to show one here. Let's see. Yeah, so this is a homeopathic remedy. It comes in a little vial. And then you just open it up and sprinkle the pellet into the lid. And then you throw it under your tongue. So just place it under the tongue and let it dissolve. During the first 24 hours of a common cold, you can use Aconitum napellus 30C, one pellet every 1 to 3 hours, depending on how severe the cold is coming on, how quickly it comes on. It's particularly great for someone who's cold and chilled. Aconitum will warm you up. And if the cold has moved a little deeper, as in coughing and bronchitis, you can combine Aconitum and Bryonia 30C, one pellet twice a day. Or if there's a gagging cough, you can use Ipecac 30C, one pellet up to 4 times a day. And if there's chronic sinus congestion and sinus headache and just phlegm in the face, you can use Sanguinaria 30C 2 to 3 times a day. So these are just some very rudimentary suggestions, and obviously respiratory conditions can have a variety of manifestations. So it's really important that you seek out a practitioner that can really tailor your symptoms to the correct remedy. That's really important because only then it's going to work. Let's see, and then I guess that's it. So you can learn about my practice at orientalhealthsolutions.com. And then you can sign up for the Holistics newsletter and more information. You can go to the Holistics webpage. I want to thank you all for listening. I hope you learned a little bit. And if you have any questions, just reach out. Thank you very much.